Welcome back to Beyond the Badge, the place where real stories remind us what courage looks like, what dignity feels like, and what truth can do when it finally stands up. It was a Tuesday morning, an ordinary, quiet Tuesday morning inside Riverside City Hall in Oregon, the kind of morning where nothing is supposed to happen. The kind of morning where the world moves slowly and people go about their lives without thinking twice. Sunlight came through the tall glass windows in long, warm, golden columns. It moved across the marble floors gently, the way sunlight moves when it has nowhere particular to be. A young mother sat hunched over a stack of paperwork at a side table near the window. Her toddler slept quietly in a stroller beside her. An elderly man in a worn plaid shirt sat near the far wall, holding a receipt with both hands, squinting at the numbers as if they kept slipping away from him. Two lawyers murmured near the elevator bank, their voices low, their coffee still steaming, their minds already somewhere else. Everything was still. Everything was calm. Everything was ordinary. And on a plain wooden bench near the security desk, a black woman in a navy blue suit sat alone. Her hands were folded gently in her lap. Her posture was straight and still. Her eyes were calm, steady, and patient. The eyes of a woman who had learned a long time ago that stillness was its own kind of strength. She was not loud. She was not demanding. She was not drawing attention to herself. She was simply waiting, quietly, invisibly. But something inside that lobby, on that ordinary Tuesday morning, was about to shatter everything. Her name was Dr. Naomi Pierce, and she was the governor of Oregon. She had arrived 18 minutes early for a scheduled meeting with the city's infrastructure committee, a meeting she had personally requested herself because she believed with every part of who she was that real leadership meant showing up, not sending representatives, not making phone calls from a comfortable distance, showing up in person. She carried no security detail that morning. No motorcade waited outside on the street. No assistant had telephoned ahead to announce her name, her title, or her office. That was intentional, because Dr. Naomi Pierce had spent 23 years in public service learning one truth, one quiet, painful, undeniable truth, that the only way to truly understand a system is to walk into it without the armor of power, without the shield of a title, without the protection of someone announcing your arrival. Just a woman, a bench, and the world exactly as it was. She had done this many times before. She had visited hospitals unannounced and walked the hallways no one expected her to walk. She had sat in community meeting halls without her name above the door, because she believed that a leader who only sees the world through the window of privilege is a leader who has already begun to lose their way. So she sat, calm, professional, and in the eyes of at least one person who would walk through that door that morning, completely invisible. Naomi Pierce had not always worn a governor's seal. She had grown up in a modest row house in northeast Portland, the second of 4 children, raised by a schoolteacher mother and a postal worker father. Their home was small, but it was full of books stacked on every surface, full of gospel music drifting softly through the hallways on Sunday mornings, full of the smell of her mother's cooking on long, cold winter evenings, and full of one lesson. One lesson repeated so often that it had stopped being just words and had become the very rhythm of Naomi's heartbeat. Her mother would say it quietly in the kitchen, at the dinner table before bed, always the same words, always the same steady voice. You will have to work twice as hard, baby. A breath. And you will have to do it with your head held twice as high. Naomi had taken those words, and she had lived them every single day. She earned a full scholarship to the University of Oregon. She graduated top of her class. She went on to earn a doctorate in public policy from Georgetown University. She served as a city councilwoman, then a state senator, and then, at 51 years old, she stood before the people of Oregon and she made history. She became the first Black woman ever elected governor of the state of Oregon. She had broken ceilings that most people had never even looked up to see. And still, on a bench, in a marble lobby, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, she was invisible. Not because she lacked presence, not because she lacked power, but because some eyes are trained to look through certain people rather than at them. Officer Brendan Walsh came through the front entrance at exactly 9:14 in the morning. His boots struck the marble floor with a sharp, deliberate echo. The sound of a man who believed the room already belonged to him before he had taken a single step inside it. He was broad-shouldered, mid-40s, with 17 years on the force and a reputation his colleagues quietly called zero tolerance. He scanned the lobby, slowly, the way a man scans a room he believes he owns. His eyes moved across the young mother, the elderly man, the lawyers near the elevator, and then they stopped. They landed on her. And Naomi felt it. She felt the shift before she even saw his face clearly. She had felt it before, many times before, hundreds of times over the course of her life. That particular quality of attention that is not curiosity, not concern, not even suspicion in the ordinary sense, but something colder, something more calculated. The kind of look that measures a person not by what they carry in their mind or in their heart, but by what they carry on the surface of their skin. Walsh walked toward her, slowly, his thumbs hooked into his belt, his jaw set, his eyes never leaving her face. He stopped directly in front of her, and he spoke. "Lady." One word, flat, certain, already decided. A long pause. "I don't know what Section 8 building you crawled out of." He looked around the lobby, then back at her. "But this isn't it." Another pause. "You need to move along." The lobby did not go silent all at once. It went silent the way a room goes silent when something terrible is beginning to happen, and no one quite believes it yet. One voice stopped, then another, until the quiet was so complete, so suffocating, that the sound of documents sliding across a marble floor seemed almost deafening. Because that is what happened next. He kicked her briefcase. He actually kicked it. Documents scattered across the floor, policy briefs, committee notes, a leather-bound agenda with the official seal of the state of Oregon embossed on its cover. They slid beneath benches, drifted toward the feet of strangers who stood frozen, mouths open, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Phones slowly came out of pockets, and then he said 4 words. 4 words in a public building, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras. He looked directly at her, and he said, "People like you don't belong here." Naomi did not yell. She did not cry. She did not reach for her phone. She did not demand to speak to a supervisor. She did not raise her voice in that desperate way that fear sometimes forces a person to raise their voice, not out of anger, but out of a painful need to be heard, to be seen, to simply be believed. She sat, perfectly still. And in that stillness, in that one suspended, breathless, heartbreaking moment, a memory came to her, quiet, unbidden, the way the oldest, deepest memories always do. She was 12 years old, standing in the cereal aisle of a grocery store with her mother. A Saturday morning, the smell of fresh bread floating down from the bakery section at the end of the aisle. She had noticed the security guard before her mother had. He was following them, aisle by aisle, pretending to look at shelves, but always there, always one aisle behind, always watching. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom." Her mother looked down at her. "Why is he following us?" Her mother did not stop walking. She did not turn around to look at him. She did not make a scene. She simply reached down and took Naomi's small hand into hers. She squeezed it once, firmly, gently, the way a lighthouse sends its beam out into the dark. And she said, quietly, without bitterness, without anger, without breaking, "Some people think we don't belong in certain places, baby." A pause. "But we do." Another pause. "We always have." She squeezed her hand again, "And don't you ever, ever forget it." Naomi had carried those words for 39 years. She carried them now, in this lobby, on this bench, with her documents scattered across the marble floor, and a man standing over her who had already decided who she was before she had spoken a single word. Her mother had taught her something that she had never once forgotten. Dignity does not scream. It stands. Walsh demanded her identification. Naomi looked up at him, slowly, calmly, and she asked, "Am I being detained?" A pause. "Officer?" Her voice was steady, clear, controlled. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and his hand moved, slowly, deliberately, toward the weapon at his hip. 3 people near the security desk stepped backward without a word. A woman near the elevator pressed herself flat against the wall. The young mother pulled her sleeping child closer in the stroller, without even realizing she had done it. Naomi reached into her jacket pocket, slowly, and produced her identification card. She held it out to him with a steady hand, her fingers not trembling, her eyes not dropping. He barely looked at it. He took it from her hand and set it on the bench beside her, carelessly, dismissively, as if it were nothing, as if she were nothing. Then, without asking permission, without a single word of explanation, he unlatched her briefcase and began rifling through her documents, roughly, impatiently. He picked up her phone from inside the case and set it down too hard on the marble floor. The screen cracked. He wrapped his hand around her wrist, firmly, tightly enough that the red marks would still be clearly visible 2 hours later, and he told her she was coming with him. He never truly saw her. He saw a silhouette, a presumption, a conclusion he had reached before he had asked a single question. A woman who, in his mind, had already been found guilty of the only crime he believed she had committed, existing in a place he had decided was not hers. It was a second officer who changed everything. He was younger, quieter. He had been standing near the entrance, watching everything, saying nothing. But now he stepped forward. He bent down slowly and picked up the identification card from the bench where Walsh had carelessly tossed it. He read it. He went completely still. He read it again. Then, very slowly, he looked up at the portrait hanging on the wall directly behind the security desk, a large, framed photograph of the governor of Oregon, placed there as a matter of civic record. He looked at the portrait. He looked back at the card. He looked at the woman sitting on the bench. And he whispered, so quietly that only the officer beside him could hear, "Brendan." A pause. "That's the governor." Walsh turned slowly. He looked at the card. He looked at the portrait. He looked at the woman on the bench. And all the certainty that had walked through that door with him at 9:14 in the morning drained from his face, in a single, silent, irreversible moment. The lobby held its breath, because what followed was not an ordinary silence. It was the kind of silence that falls when truth arrives so suddenly, so completely, that the mind simply cannot find the words to hold it. Naomi rose from the bench, slowly, fully, without hurry. She smoothed the front of her navy suit jacket with one calm, careful hand. She looked at Officer Walsh, not with rage, not with triumph, but with something far more powerful than either of those things: sorrow and clarity, and the kind of quiet strength that only comes from a lifetime of standing up when the world told you to sit down. She spoke, her voice low, steady, unhurried. The voice of a woman who had spent a lifetime choosing her words with the care of someone who understood exactly how much they weighed. Officer Walsh. She let his name sit in the air for a moment. If I were a white woman in a suit, a pause. Sitting on that same bench, another pause. Would you have approached me? At all? The lobby was absolutely silent. Not a single person moved, not a single person answered, because not a single person in that room needed to. She continued, You didn't need to know who I was. Her voice remained calm, steady. You needed to treat me like a human being. A breath. That should have been enough. She looked at him directly. It should always have been enough. Those words did not echo. They settled, like something heavy and true being placed carefully on the floor of a quiet room. Phones had been recording for the past 4 minutes, and in those 4 minutes, the story had already stopped being about a governor and a police officer. It had become something larger, something older, something that millions of Americans would recognize the moment they saw it, because they had lived it, in grocery stores, in parking lots, in office buildings, in their own neighborhoods, on ordinary mornings, just like this one. Within minutes, everything changed. The mayor arrived, his face pale, his expression grave. The police chief followed closely behind him. State police officers moved quietly through the lobby, securing the entrances. A federal liaison was contacted within the hour. The security footage was pulled immediately, reviewed once, then reviewed again. What it showed was undeniable. Officer Brendan Walsh, over the course of his 17-year career, had accumulated 17 separate complaints of excessive force. 17. Each one filed properly, each one reviewed by supervisors, each one quietly buried, dismissed beneath paperwork and silence and the invisible protection that too often shields the wrong people for far too long. Until now. The handcuffs that clicked that morning did not close around Naomi Pierce's wrists. They closed around his. In the weeks that followed, a federal court convened. The jury watched the footage from 4 separate camera angles. They heard his words, played back slowly, clearly, without question. They saw him dismiss her identification. They saw him kick her briefcase. They saw him grab her wrist. They heard him say, "People like you." His attorney stood before the court and said, "Your Honor," a pause. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but the jury understood something quietly and completely, that mistakes, by their nature, do not repeat themselves 17 times. What repeats 17 times is not a mistake. It is a pattern. It is a choice. It is a system. The verdict came after 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. 7 years in federal prison, a permanent, irrevocable ban from law enforcement. But Governor Pierce knew that justice is never truly finished in a courtroom. The Department of Justice launched a full civil rights investigation into the Riverside Police Department. Dozens of buried complaints came slowly to the surface. Federal oversight was imposed. Body cameras became mandatory. Supervisors were replaced. Officers were retrained, not merely in procedure, but in something far more difficult and far more important, in the art of seeing people as people. And inside Riverside City Hall, beneath the portrait of Governor Naomi Pierce that hung on the wall where it had always hung, a small bronze plaque was carefully installed. It read, "Justice requires no credentials." A breath. Dignity is a birthright. Some weeks after the trial concluded, Governor Pierce sat down for one interview. No podium, no flags arranged carefully behind her, no prepared statement waiting on a desk. Just a woman, a chair, a camera, and a truth she needed the country to hear. She sat quietly for a moment before she spoke. Then she looked into the camera and she said, "That day," a long pause, "wasn't about me." She folded her hands in her lap. I was safe. I had power. I had a title and a portrait on the wall, and people who would come running the moment they learned who I was. A pause. I was protected. She looked down for just a moment, then back up. But this story is about the people who aren't. Her voice grew quieter. The nurse, coming home from a double shift. The college student, driving his father's car. The father, who doesn't have cameras recording. The grandmother, who files a complaint that disappears into a drawer. She paused. A long, still, quiet pause. Those are the people this story is really about. Those are the people we owe an answer to. She leaned forward just slightly, and she looked directly into the camera one final time. Respect should not be a reward for status. Dignity should not require identification. And belonging, a breath. Belonging should never be something a person has to prove. If this story moved you, if it made you stop and think and feel, if it reminded you of someone you love who has carried this weight quietly, without recognition, without anyone standing up for them, then this channel is your home. Every story we tell here, at Beyond the Badge, is a story about the quiet ones, the ones who stand with grace when the world offers them none, the ones who carry dignity like armor, the ones whose courage never made the headlines until it finally did. If you believe that every human being deserves to be seen, truly, fully seen, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, and leave a comment below. Tell us, what did this story make you feel? Because your voice matters here. Beyond the Badge, where real courage lives. We will see you in the next story.